Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to the channel, RPG with DBJ. This is a week-long, long-form discussion channel that we broadcast over on Twitch, YouTube, and our own Discord server, so you may participate in the show therein using those mechanisms. Today, we are doing a slight bit of a shift in the titling of the show. The show being, not that we're getting rid of it. It was Discord Tuesday. Then we switched to what I think is aptly named Crunch Time Tuesday. But today we're talking about war. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk about it all week long. So I thought I'd shift the title just slightly from TVs and movies to tabletop RPGs. And the reason why I did that is because we're going to, if you take a look at the thumbnail, or you've taken a look at the thumbnail, you'll see that there's an image from the Battle of the Bastards. And that today we're going to talk about how to mechanically even render in some of these iconic movie scenes that we see in our major battles and such, and how we can ramp up the tension, put it into our Dungeons and Dragons or other fantasy role-playing games, and that sort of thing. So I thought we'd start out that way. Just to let everybody know, as I said before, this is on 3 platforms, as well as the fact that as we get more participants, that I may not be able to highlight everyone's comment, but maybe, just maybe, your comment might be the highlight of our show. So let's jump into it. So you don't need to have seen the Battle of the Bastards, although quite easily you can just type it in and search it on YouTube and find plenty of clips about it and analyses about it and such like that. But essentially there's basically 3 to 5 different I'll say situational changes. And a lot of times in a battle, these situational changes will happen due to how they are filmed. And so we're going to talk about a little bit of cinematically how battles are done, how we bring that into the game, and then we'll get into the Battle of the Bastards. So for the most part, in general, major battles, swords and maybe a little bit of sorcery thrown in there, are done in a 3-part series. So the first part is the Eagle Eye, right? That is allowing the viewer, and of course, as the participants in the game, you can use these techniques as well, which is why I'm bringing it up. The Eagle Eye method, and the Eagle Eye image is how the entire battle is looking for good or bad for either the protagonist or the antagonist, right? It is, if it is sieging a castle, you get an image of a moment in where the forces are rallied, okay, from very far away. That's where you see the CGI soldiers running across the fields of battle or clashing against each other or something. Sometimes this is this might even be a foreshadow of something else coming in to change the parameters of the battle, whether it's some big flying monster or creature, such as the Nazgul or a dragon or something. Maybe there are reinforcements coming in from boats or ships, or something is amiss, from a back door of the castle or something like that, right? It gives it an opportunity for we as the participants to see the whole thing from the eagle's eye. Now, Cameron says, would it be better to represent a large group of enemies as one creature with many parts, or as a piece of environment that spawns key combatants for the players to interact with? Ooh, see, okay, all right, you're already there. So let me move through this real quickly. So then so you get the Eagle Eye, and the Eagle Eye is basically who's winning or losing, and what element is going to interact soon to change what's going to happen. Maybe enemies reinforced, maybe there's something dropping from the sky. You're getting an image about that. Then the second one is zooms in a bit, and we see our protagonists, our main characters, our PCs engaged in a battle and you get to see, and they're going to go on Cameron's comment, you get to see how the environment is changing. Now, that environment, of course, we're talking about war. Instead of the environment as I normally talk about it, rain, storms, earthquakes, blizzards, fog, and that kind of thing. Instead, the environment itself are people battling. Okay. And Cameron brings up, would it be better to represent a large group of enemies as one creature with many parts, or as a piece of environment that spawns key combatants for the players to interact with? Excuse me. Wow. I'm going to go with both. Usually what I do is, if something is stationary, it's an environment. When you have large combatants, I think of it as a piece of environment that has things that break off of it. Okay. An example would be like a siege weapon or a phalanx, or I guess it's an equivalent of it, like the Spartan 300 when they get into their shield wall. Same thing with a Viking shield wall or something. That shield wall would be for me would be considered a piece of environment, because of how massive or structurally sound it would be, right? And this could be anything from represented as a castle or something of that nature. Now, if it's dynamic and it's moving, like in the beginning of the Battle of the Bastards, well, not the beginning, one of the opening scenes in which our main character is standing in front of a charging, cavalry, which we're going to talk about and how to do that. I would consider that a very large, instead of a large group of like 13 having to roll 13 times or 27 times for cavalry, which is not only boring, but kind of doesn't represent exactly what we're thinking of, that it's one giant monster that the PCs can hack off little bits and pieces of, right? So so to represent that, like that standing in front of a charging, cavalry, and no matter how strong your PC is, you're thinking like, there's no way this person's going to be able to stand up to, 30, 50, 100 charging horses or whatnot. Well, the answer to that is no, you really can't do that unless, an archer or crossbowman or whatever, spearman or something, start hacking away at this larger creature that's mobile across the battlefield. So that's how I would play it. It could be, a charging cavalry could be like a 500 to 1,000 hit point creature, which, logically no one human being could, withstand on their own, unless they are, you're talking 10th level plus, in which case at that point when you're willingly going to other planes of existence and doing battle with demon lords or something like that, well, yeah, because you're pretty much a superhero, but far beyond fantasy realm. But if you're talking a little bit more lower fantasy, gritty, bloody, that kind of thing, yeah, I think it would be best represented that way. So when we zoom down to the actions that our player characters are taking, this technique can easily be supplanted with what a chase scene would be, in a sense that we start moving things in and around the battlefield, foreshadowing things that are to come. So, for example, in a battle, much like a chase or any kind of vehicular battles, like ships or aquatic ships, aerial ships, horse riding, mounted combat, anything like that, what you do is you set the scene, and then on the periphery of that scene, you foreshadow what might happen again. For example, when someone tells the archers to reload, and and somebody in the group is like, but we're going to be shooting our own people, and they're like, I told you to fire. And all of a sudden the sun's blotted out with the arrows. That's a foreshadow of, PCs are in the midst of a battlefield. They're fighting in chaos, and then here's the next round. Here comes the next event, whether it's like taking cover, deck saves, disengaging, and that kind of thing, and forcing the player characters to make a hard decision. So the first part I thought we would talk about in the Battle of Bastards is, and kind of already talked about it here, is the idea of the Charging Cavalry. And I think the Charging Cavalry could very well, I don't think that you would be wrong to make like the Charging Cavalry like an environmental effect, meaning like, you know, you need to either duck for cover or do enough damage to take out enough riders and their mounts to open up a space so that you're not trampled. But you could very easily have a PC locked in battle with a number of enemies, and then here comes mounted chargers moving through the battlefield, and now the PCs have to make a choice. Okay, do I remain locked in battle with my enemy, knowing that these charging riders with lances and things are going to push through this region? What happens if I get trampled? How much damage am I going to take? Am I going to be shoved into the ground and pushed down prone? If it's a multiple line, like more of a mob, will I be prevented from standing back up because of the multiple, you know, horse hooves or whatever mounted creatures that are there are, you know, bearing down on me as the PC, preventing me from getting back up? It's that kind of thing. And you could very easily reskin this as some of these elements as complex traps, right? I know it sounds kind of strange to say it that way, but one of the weaknesses, I guess you could say, of being knocked down is you can just take an action and stand back up. And my contention is, sure, if there's nothing preventing you or creating a difficulty for you to stand back up in the first place, like getting knocked down on a frozen lake, right? But in a battle, when you're knocked down in a battle, it's possible you could get trampled, which happened in the Battle of the Bastards as well. So, okay, so Charging Cavalry. Also, you could actually reskin if you don't want the hassle of having to figure out mounted combat in general, because it is kind of wonky in 5th edition. Especially as a DM, handling like, okay, I've got horses I've got to contend with, I've got riders I have to contend with, I have to contend with movement and dismounting and all that. Instead, just make the mounted rider one, give it a couple of stats, and make the mounted rider one creature that a piece of it can be hacked off of. So what I'm saying is, the with a sword or a lance or a spear or something, that's probably one attack, maybe a attack you can switch between. And then the horse itself, with its hooves and its ability to knock someone down, push them out of the way, or stomp on them when they're down and prevent them from getting back up, could be another action for that monster, right? And just using it as a stat block. Of course, this is all descriptive, this is all narrative, but if a PC is able to take an action, like a contested action, to knock a rider off of the horse, then maybe that's an excellent way to get the rider off the horse. Now the horse is gone, the mounted action of that creature is gone, or mounted aspect of that enemy is gone, and now you have, you know, PC against rider, right? Whatever, however you describe the riders, and then just use them. So it could be like strength versus strength, or athletics versus athletics, or something of that nature, right? And just allow the player, like, oh, you mean I have the option to dismount the rider? Like, hell yeah! All right, I'm going to pick up a random spear, like jam him in the chest, get him off his horse, because the horse is really like, you know, futzing with me because I keep having to spend my action to try to get the hell back up again, right? Or spend movement, or whatever the case may be, or have to make an athletics check to even stand up because I keep getting stomped back down by all the multiple horses and combatants running across the battlefield wanting to step on the back of my neck, right? So that's a possibility. Now, Cameron says, it says a mean trap, 30-foot pit, spikes at the bottom, broken glass on the walls. The whole thing is covered in sovereign glue. Yeah, that's why I'm not a big proponent of like traps in the classic sense, because because it's a gotcha, right? Either the game master goes, ha ha, I got you, and the PCs fold their arms and they pout, or the PCs completely avoid it and they go, ha ha, I missed it, and the game master like folds their arms and pouts. Whereas making something interactive and dynamic. Like a 30-foot pit isn't bad, but a 30-foot pit where there are other things happening, like enemies trying to push the PCs down into the pit and lock the top, or enemies getting pushed into a pit, and then all of a sudden you hear water starting to flood from the bottom while there's other things happening while the PCs are trying to climb out. Like, make it, I think a trap is more interesting when there are other things going on. Even if the PCs have an easy way to get out of it, they could then, I love using and abusing the environment, so they can use that as well. Moving on to from the cavalry in the Battle of Bastards was the very next scene, which was a combination of real participants and CGI and timing, where it was just complete chaos, right? Where we see our main character dodging arrows and trying to defend one of his own allies, who ends up getting hacked in the back with an axe or something, and then a mounted rider gets knocked down, and you got to dodge out of the way of a horse, and then a random spear gets thrown right past him and the enemy he's fighting, thrown towards the camera, and all that kind of stuff. Now, to represent chaos, it's pretty easy, right? Make a list. Here's where we get into random encounters, right? Each round, or each PC even on the battlefield, you roll once around and you go, okay, here's the thing that the PC is going to, as the PCs are fighting enemies, here's the random thing that's going to take place in their region, including maybe a 0-point count where it's like, oh, nothing happens. And then you got your D8 list or your D20 list or D100. You could struggle with a D100 table on a battlefield, but D8, D10 is pretty easy. I think I've made a D20 table already in trying to write a battlefields for cinematic environments. But anything from like that cloud of arrows I was talking about that's going to come crashing down on where the one or more of the PCs are standing. Anything from mounted riders charging through a region, and then you could even mix it up with like a phalanx of soldiers moving through, or a bunch of spearmen or pikemen standing there getting ready to challenge one of the PCs. A random swing of an axe or a sword that just happens to miss one person heading towards the PC. And so you could make a list of like, oh, randomly one of the PCs gets attacked with a sneak attack. Maybe a random spear gets thrown and the PC has to dodge or block it or something like that. Or you do some kind of evasion or whatever. Same thing with like a burning wagons or siege engines that are collapsing, or an allied soldier whose entrails are spilling out, stumbles and tries to grapple one of the PCs, begging for help and to save them, and how interesting would it be to fight, and then all of a sudden one of your allies grabs on your shoulder and draping his dying body across the PC as they're doing battle, and the PC doesn't really want to say it, but they're like, get the hell off of me, man, I'm trying to have a fight here. By the way, guys, I know it looks a little bit odd here. It looks a little bit dark in my background. Decided what I couldn't bring out my screen, so I decided to see what it would look like in the dark as the sun comes up. Because you guys know that I get up at 5:30 in the morning and have to stumble around and such. Just as a last thing, just to warn everyone, there have been storms here, and my internet got knocked out before I got online. So it's possible this might be a broken. I'm not wishing anything, but this might be a broken stream as well. So fingers crossed. It's been pretty good to me so far, 99% of the time. So anyway, random things happening on the battlefield. Things can happen with allies, like injured allies that are, like I said, draped across a PC and preventing them, or giving them disadvantage or something because they're trying to grapple them because they're begging to like, save me, please, or a PC trying to hide and sneak across a battlefield, and one of their allies sees them and starts screaming out their name, like come here, help me, please, but my leg, a blinded participant in a battle swinging wildly around while the PC's trying to, do battle with their own enemy. And then this random, you know, ally or enemy comes swinging wildly because they've been blinded or something. The a fight is happening, a pitched battle is happening between other people that the PC isn't even involved in, but the whole gang of them are like mashed together and they come storming through or tumbling over where the PCs are at, and get covered, by bodies or something, which is another thing. Bloody, the battlefield getting muddy and bloody, right? That could be a slippery hazard as well. There could be something random that's thrown in there. Player characters needing to watch their step over that difficult terrain because of the dead horses and broken wagon wheels and, dozens upon dozens of the dead that they've got to step over. That kind of thing. So random arrows, random things falling from the sky. What are siege weapon things like catapult chunk, not catapult, trebuchet chunks and such falling from the sky as well. Could also be things. And mind you, this is all non-arcane aspects. Arcane aspects from doing battle with an enemy that has power over the elements. So powerful gusts of wind or bolts of lightning from the sky, or hell, a random fireball just happens to or blast of burning hands, or stream of flame or something burns through the battlefield for some random reason. So those are like random things that you could add in, layering it on top of a fight that the PCs are already having, forcing them to have to navigate their movement. What do I do with my action? What do I do with my bonus action? All those kind of things, layering it on. So as we move through the Battle of the Bastards, we move into, let's go towards the Phalanx Wall and the crushing, the suffocation, the crushing element. Now, the Phalanx Wall is where we see the enemies got their tower shields, and the enemy allies are like standing behind them, where they link all their tower shields together. They've got their pikes out to keep the enemy at bay and such. Again, you could make that describe that, while of course they're people holding tower shields, but instead of having to write down the hit points and maneuvers of 687 tower shield wielders, you can make that an environmental effect, allowing them to do damage to. This isn't something that they can't move. If they do enough damage to a thing, maybe they can break through that Phalanx Wall. But it can also be a matter of like skill checks, challenges, strength versus strength, or athletics versus athletics, to try to force your way or push through. With the spears themselves become a hazard unto themselves. So if let's say a PC monk, wants to drop kick somebody in the Phalanx Wall, well, the spears or halberds or whatever the case, whatever kind of pikes or something they're using, have reach. So they would have to maneuver past the thing that they need to get past to get to the shields, and failure would prevent them from getting to the shield wall itself, right? So that could be, as I'm describing it, it sounds like an environmental effect, but even in battle, right, you could just say, okay, there's dozens upon dozens of these spear things hold, as the spearmen and the pikemen are trying to keep you at bay. That's kind of the whole point of keeping you at bay. So if you can't get past through this, or you're willing to suffer the damage it would take to close the distance into the shield wall, then go ahead, monk, you can start kicking some ass, right? Whereas, failure to do so, whether you want to do it with skill checks or with some kind of evasion or saving throws or what have you, to maneuver past. And mind you, the entire time the Phalanx is up, there may still be other enemies on the battlefield. So again, splitting the attention, forcing the players to use their resources, and time is a resource. And your actions, your bonus actions, your movement, those are resources, and they might have to spread their resources thin to do a thing. So as we get move further into the Battle of the Bastards, that was when the shield wall was closing in. Because remember, not only is our main character fighting, but we also have the allies as well. Okay, so the allies themselves become both you need them to succeed, and the PCs may need to take actions to save them. Because remember, while we're describing this battle, we're going to the eagle eye look. Okay, who's winning or losing? We start to zoom in where the PCs and the region that's around them. So we can alert the PCs as to the success and or failure of their own allies and that army, and then we focus directly, boom, pop right down into the PCs' eyes and ears and what they're doing and what they see. And during that battle, our main character Jon Snow was knocked down and was about to get crushed by his own people, who were getting forced into this pincer maneuver as they're trying to do battle with the enemy. And again, here's my contention always about the people who complain that knocking someone down or pushing them 5 feet or knocking them prone is useless. I'm saying, well, yeah, it's useless on a flat plane with no other elements, right? But if you're getting shoved down into dead bodies and your own allies are panicked and they're stepping on your back, and like Cameron says, like Cameron mentions, says one fall and you're done. Only plot armor or critical can save you from that kind of trampling and suffocation. Yeah, well, you're not wrong, man. Plot armor is kind of built into the game. The fact that, like, oh, why do PCs get 3 death saves? Why don't dragons get the same thing? Or why do powerful enemies get legendary actions? Right? Technically it's plot armor. What's inspiration? What's advantage or disadvantage? Those things are technically plot armor. PCs getting more hit points. So you're not wrong. But you could very well one way that I wasn't trying to make this a third pillar Thursday, but maybe this has something to do with it. One way you could represent that is that on your own, there may be no way for a single participant to overcome the challenge in the first place unless they take particular actions. So what I mean by that is that, for example, maybe pushing through that crowd, getting trampled by that crowd, is a DC of like 35, right? There's no, unless you're like a 17th level character, you're not getting past the 35 DC on because of how the bounded accuracy of 5th edition is. But an ally helping you or taking an action to reduce the DC itself may be the thing that could help you achieve the goal that you're looking for, right? So, going with the critical or the plot armor thing in the story, because it is written that way, right? It's not. I'm describing it like a role playing game, but that's not really the issue, okay? But if the DC to stand up getting trampled by your own allies because they're panicked and stepping on your back and shoving you down into the bloody mud and you're about to have suffocate, well, guess what? We have suffocation rules, right? And we also have what's known as, you can do something called escalation as well, where, hey, getting knocked down to stand back up is a DC of 15, or because there's so many combatants, maybe it's a low DC like a 12 or 14 or 15 or something. But to stand up, you have disadvantage on it, and if you fail, it just keeps getting worse for you unless an ally gives you a help action to reach down, or someone spends their, when they do that help action, they're going to have to spend their resources to help you in their time of need, hoping that they themselves don't get knocked down, right? So there is a way to get around the idea that on your own you're probably dead, but with help or with luck you can get out of it. Like, luck could be, hey, if you spend your inspiration, the DC's cut in half or something like that, which technically is plot armor, right? And the PCs are the heroes, So your average your average farmer, they're dead. They're just their body's getting shoved down in the mud and we'll never see them again. Whereas for the PC, they're of course they're suffering hit point damage, maybe if you take a look at the suffocation rules, while they aren't very good, the I know that song. I get knocked down, but I get up again, and I ain't never going to keep me down. Oh, I'm going to get dinged on that one. Pissing the night away, or pissing because the night's away. So I think you could represent it that way, as far as like, hey, if you get, or you could foreshadow it like, all right, PCs, if you get knocked down, there's a really good chance that when you get to the point of suffocating, like what is it? Con, you could make it 1 plus your con mod number of rounds before you drop to 0 hit points. Because when you start suffocating, you drop to 0 hit points, and you start making death saves. You go, all right, listen, you've got a con bonus of +1. I'm giving you a +1 round. If you get knocked down and you can't stand up in 2 rounds, you're dropping to 0 hit points, and you're like, oh shoot, oh, what am I going to do? And then that can ramp up the tension of, well, sure, my fighter has, action surge and doing all these other things, but I might need to spend that to rush to my ally instead of taking another swipe at that ogre or something like that while I'm in this pitched battle. So, again, mind you, main character getting shoved down by your allies. An easy way out of that would be a well-placed lightning bolt or fireball, right? Or hacking at your own allies. But is that a smart thing to do? Probably not. Right? So you have that issue. Okay, so main character scrambles, reaches the air while the battle is raging around them, and then to get out of the phalanx, they have to climb a pile of dead bodies. There you go with the environment again, right? So not only is it athletics check, climbing, whatever you want to call it, but there's also the possibility of maybe having those dead bodies fall back on top of you. So you could make the case that, this is where you can modulate the intensity of an encounter, right? So, okay, success gets you to the top of the mound, right? Or halfway up or something. Failure maybe doesn't get you to move anyway. And then a fail by a certain amount, because we've seen this in 5th edition already, right? Like if you fail a save against being petrified, there's a way for you to get out of it. But if you fail by a larger amount, you're instantly stuck. Okay, so same thing could be here. You can modulate it. Well, okay, if you fail it by 5 or more, sorry, you're getting buried in dead bodies. Or who's to say those piles of dead bodies don't have living people in it that are grasping at your thighs and your legs or your arms, grasping at anything because they themselves are suffocating, or is their last breath dying kind of thing. So that's another thing too, where arms and legs could be reaching for, grasping for the PCs, maybe even grabbing for their weapons and their items and things like that, grasping for their last breath. And the PCs are trying to scramble over this big pile of dead bodies before they're speared to death, Cameron's like, oh, geez, just thought about the giant hobo backpacks players have. Yep. Yep. Are we generally supposed to ignore those? Because that kind of bulk would make tight fighting tough, but would also protect their backs. You know what? I would allow both of those, right? Like, why? Things don't need to be one or the other. So carrying around all that crap, who's to say that an errant axe blow doesn't cut through the bottom of their backpack and have things spill out, or the wizard's pouch of material components doesn't accidentally get ripped off and some random warrior steps on it and shoves it down into the mud, and now the wizard's like, what? I can't find it, or someone gets disarmed and whatnot. So yeah, you guys know me. I love my fumble crit tables. In the cinematic environments, there's fumble crit tables, called that because if a PC rolls a fumble, a 1, then the thing happens to them. And if they roll a crit, there's a possibility that thing happens to their adversary, right? And so getting disarmed, dropping random items, being disoriented, and being accidentally blinded by something, whether it's smoke or poison gas or an errant cloak thrown in the face or a blood splatter or something like that. Tripping and falling, getting your legs entangled in someone's internal organs that spilled out from them. Those are the kind of things that could be random things placed on the battlefield instead of us just defaulting to difficult terrain. And yes, I know it feels like it's complicated, but it's no more complicated than a monster stat block. We're just used to looking at a monster stat block rather than looking at one of our notes and going, oh, well, I guess it's going to start to rain or something. Or the allies set up smoke to block our progress. But of course, we can't see on the other side of the smoke, but neither can our enemies aim at us with, their hail of arrows or something like that. On a battlefield, there might be lots of cover for players to use and sneak around behind if possible. Using deception to pretend to be a downed foe. Enemies could do the same thing to pretend like you're laying or pulling those dead bodies over top of you and hiding, so you get yourself some stealth or some deception or something. Yeah. Thanks, Cameron. Cameron says, I read through the Desert Environs book. I love those fumble crit tables. They don't feel cheap, which cannot be said for most critical fail tables out there. I don't like... I talk this way, but I really don't like super gonzo stuff like, oh, you stabbed yourself in the back. Like, it's what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But, if you're fighting on, in sand dunes and someone gets knocked down a sand dune and then they end up getting covered or they fall into waist deep sand and they can't move, and the desert-like bugbears are closing in on the PC. To me, I like that. I like the ramp. I like the tension to rise and keep rising and giving the game master tools to make the tension rise. So, there's a bunch of other things that happen in the Battle of the Bastards running across open fields, and you have your one-on-one battles and things like that can happen. But the idea of like having blood sprayed in someone's face or a spear breaking off as you jam it through someone's chest, or any number of these things happening, to me, I think is really cool. Especially if you, again, you zoom out and you start to zoom in, where you set up a thing where the battlefield itself is a dungeon that has moving parts in it. Okay, so for an example, what is there's a trap and a spell that mimics this with spinning blades. It may still be, I can't remember the cleric spell. But anyway, there's like a wall of blades that can like spin around. It does damage if you try to move through it, and it sits somewhere. You could put a trap like that with spinning blades or pendulum blades in a dungeon. But the same thing applies on a battlefield, right? If you look down, you use your eagle eye and you start to zoom down on the battlefield, maybe there are these obstacles that are placed in and around the battlefield that you place there and go, sure, you can make a direct line from between here and to your, I don't know, the chieftain, the battle chieftain in the battle, but you're going to be moving through the La Machine, the ninja slice and dicer, because your allies and enemies are locked in battle and they're swinging so wildly and rapidly that you as the PC might need to maneuver around it. So you give the PCs choices. Okay, you can take your movement and move around this deadly area, or you can just charge right through it, with the chance that you might get hit by the warriors locked in battle as they're swinging their swords and axes and daggers and broken spears at each other, right? What's something else that happens on battlefields? Lots of weapons dropped. So PCs can grab a whole ton of weapons, both in good condition and not. And they're not necessarily improvised weapons, but and maybe they are, right? Like you can take, well, a broken spear, improvised weapon, we'll call that a short sword, or what is that? A long sword broken in half, we'll make that a short sword. You know, I pick up a big giant rock. Well, uh, the improvised weapon rules say die for or an item that most represents a weapon of its similar type, right? So a big giant rock could be a two-handed weapon that's usable once, or hey, I'll let you do a die 12 with that big giant rock, but you got to make a strength check to pick it up, or something like that. Like you could establish some of these things. You could lead enemies into other things on the battlefield. If there's a burning wagon or a wild horse with its downed rider that's stuck in the stirrups, getting dragged through the battlefield, and a PC notices it, they could time it where they start locking weapons with an enemy, and then all of a sudden they get run over or trampled by that burning wagon. Although that burning wagon could be coming after the PC themselves, and they may have to drop to the ground and purposefully fall prone to let it roll over top of them so they don't get run over and burned and crushed by the burning wagon itself. And you could make this random tables. You can have a list of, wouldn't it be cool if these things happen? You could, those things could be set up by the player's actions themselves. When, one of your players shoots a burning hand spell at a siege weapon to stop it from acting, maybe you're like, "Ooh, wouldn't it be cool if that siege tower just fell over?" All right, well, now here you. How do I represent that? Well, let's look through the book. Is it a collapsing ceiling trap? Maybe that's it. Or is it a? Do you add some DCs that actually represent both DCs and strength and all that kind of stuff? Adding some dice for like burning damage and whatnot. Of course. I mean, if we look in the books now, there's lots of spells and or flammable things that go, oh, if this thing happens, other things will ignite. But there's no rules to tell you what happens when you ignite something, which allows you as the game master to do whatever you want to do in those situations. So there are ways to gamify a battlefield if we erase the serial numbers off of what we think of a dungeon. And because a battlefield is basically moving walls, moving traps, moving obstacles, moving enemies and allies around your dungeon, moving those things around, because a battlefield can be very dynamic, but it's also like a dungeon without a ceiling on top of it. So flying enemies and or PCs could see over areas and move over them, although they may also become targets for those on the ground as well. So you might have to worry about that. Worrying about the aftermath of an event. A fire-breathing dragon is going to set fire to the battlefield, most likely. So then the dragon flies by, strafes the allies. PCs make their dodge rolls, they make their saves, they look around, they see their allies on fire, and maybe a big chunk of it is like a big flaming wall. So now there is a wall of fire in the way, right? So stacking and being aware of what's happening in your battle, and then allowing those things to happen, like a PC. Red Dragon does strafing fire, burns a bunch of things, big fire, wall of fire there in the PC's way. One PC's like, I'm going to jump through it. Another one is like, well, I'm going to grab my enemy by the lapels and toss them into the fire, and let them use it, Like Cameron says, I'd give a palm-sized rock a D4. I've been stoned kind of before. If it hits your elbow or your head or knee, you're in a bunch of trouble. Yeah, no doubt. Thank you for bringing it up. Inadvertently, there are plenty of conditions. Take a look at your conditions table. Restrained, grappled, stunned, incapacitated, unconscious, blinded, deafened, exhaustion, and all that kind of business. Those things could be happening on battlefields as well, based on how long they've been on the battlefield through the exhaustion, what is being placed on the battlefield, like the enemy sends out burning, throwing tangled hemp soaked in oil, set on fire, and launched into the battle. So what does that act like? Well, you're like, you know what? I'm just going to make this a fireball, right? Easy substitution. And then, or maybe you want to say, okay, they launch these things into the air, into the battlefield, but it's filled with some kind of like toxic gas or something, and the enemy throws out the Molotov cocktail of toxic gases, or burning embers or something like that. So the PCs might suffer blindness or exhaustion, or temporary reduction in constitution or strength or something, because they're choking on the smoke that is so prevalent in the area, or something like that. Cameron says, yeah, decrease of movement speed always drove me nuts tactically as a player. Yep, decreases in movement can happen plenty of times. Don't twist an ankle. Don't have to. What is it? Anakin, no, I've got the high ground, right? Like in a battle, you never want to be in the low ground if there's high ground. So you, as the game master, could even establish, like, okay, listen. There's 3 areas on the battlefield. There's the big pile of dead bodies. There is the siege tower that got knocked over, and there's a wagon of supplies that's been flipped on its side, and the horse is dead or something. Guys, if you get to that high point, you'll have advantage, right? You can pre-establish, as people do battle, that it's beneficial for them to be in one place or another, which the converse of that would be, if you're at the bottom of a castle wall and there's enemies above you at the top of the wall, it's pretty reasonable to assume that the people at the top of the wall have advantage throwing things down at you, right? So yeah, they've got the advantage at the top of the wall. You already know this as a warrior. Sure, is this meta knowledge? Yes, but technically it's not. We have narrative. We're smart. We can describe things as yeah, it's pretty difficult for you to try to climb up this wall. If freestyle climb up the wall with your hands and feet, while there's enemies. Your enemy above you is behind the castle wall, throwing spears and rocks and pouring burning pitch down on top of you, or grease, just plain old grease down the wall. Same thing goes with trying to climb like ladders, or moving a siege tower into position, and then running up the steps or the ladders of the siege tower to then throw the siege tower ladders or hooks onto the wall to do that. All the things I'm describing are like would consider them to be multi-staged events, right? So A, you got to get close to a castle wall. B, you have to set up the ladders or towers or whatever it is, however you're going to go over the wall. And then 3, scaling it to get over the wall, right? These are 3-stage elements. And of course, the enemy is not going to be stupid. All it takes is a stick with a U or a Y on it, and then push the ladders over, right? So it might be, okay, PC and your allies, gather them together to get close enough. All right, we've gotten close. I'll use a spell or some kind of attack to keep the enemy from sniping you while you get the ladders into position. Okay, now that the ladders are in position, we're going to start climbing up the ladders, but of course they're going to take the rods to try to push the ladders and tumble them backwards. So someone might need to snipe the ladder pushers so that doesn't happen. But if a PC is on the ladder, who's up towards the top of the ladder and then gets pushed backwards, you've got the falling damage. You've got to do the whole thing all over again, right? To me, that's awesome. Like, as a player character, instead of going, I make an athletics check to climb the wall, roll, okay, I climb it. You can make it multi-stage. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. You need 3 successes to accomplish getting over it. Like Cameron says, cinematically, the high ground it is an advantage. However, in real life, a high ground puts you at a disadvantage, but only in hand-to-hand combat. I hate to have my army run uphill. I rule cinematically in my games, though. Yeah, me too, me too. And I feel like maybe we don't, and this is just anecdotally, right? Like I feel like we don't use that enough, or I don't know. It almost feels like we don't want to do that because we're somehow breaking the rules of the game. And everyone knows that if you're doing it right, if you're having fun. And for me, the fun of that would be like, will my PC get knocked back on the ladder, or will I make it over the castle wall? Right, that tension in my chest, I feel is greater than the idea of trying to circumvent the whole thing because we want to get past the we want to rush so much into the important part with the big bad evil guy when the cool part of the things that we love to engage in and we watch on TV and movies is the battle itself, right? Otherwise, we would just do we would just fade to black, come back after a commercial break, and then the hero's in the main courtroom, and you're like, what happened to the battle? Well, that battle is happening off screen. Don't worry about that, right? And sometimes I think we do that to ourselves. We fade to black to get past the accursed desert. We fade to black to get past the maneuvering through the dangerous, you know, dangerous trap-ridden field of battle before trying to climb up the castle walls or something like that. Now, of course, this works on the other side, right, where the PCs might be inside the castle and the enemy is trying to climb up the castle walls. So of course the PCs are going to do things like push ladders over, spill oil or grease. That, the bard with the grease spell, I'm going to do a grease spell and use that against the walls or something like that. That's when the PCs get creative. And the other one's like, I'm going to use burning hands to alight the grease. Of course, that if you guys agree that a grease spell actually produces grease, where a grease spell is just the name. Maybe it just makes something frictionless, which in and of itself may be good or bad because, it's like, well, if your grease spell makes grease, someone could light on fire and it makes that a double hazard. But the enemy could light the grease on fire to get rid of the grease because at some point the fire is going to go out as it burns all the grease off the wall, right? So that's a possibility as well. And with your own group, you could decide whether that's an effect or not, because technically none of that exists in the rules. That's agreed upon at the table. The other thing that can, going back to the conditions in a battle, the oft unused but possible to use are mental exhaustion, i.e. sanity rules, right? A pitched battle can have an effect on you psychologically over time. So yeah. Cameron says, ask me, what is your ratio for environmental hazards to enemy combatants in a battlefield? You're not going to like this answer, but the ratio of combatants to hazards is the ratio of how pissed off I'm going to be having to handle too many creatures or monsters or combatants, right? Like me, I have zero interest in rolling for 50 times at a table. Now, mind you, our minds go, well, if there's a big battle and I've got 700 combatants, that means I've got 700 die rolls. And the answer to that is no, you don't. Yes, you can, but you really don't want to do that. You're going to bring the energy of your table down so fast if you do that. What you said, Cameron, is what I default to are broken chunks, right? Because the PCs they're only going to want to interact with the things that are around them. Now, yes, you can tell them that there are things happening outside of their field of vision or beyond their range of their ability to connect with it. But that's where you as a game master have the ability to, like me, I would use the environment as the charging siege weapons, the cavalry, the phalanx shields, and all that business. The reason why I would do that is because I I don't want the rules to get in the way of the flow of what's happening. Um, as simulationists, we often think, well, the simulation of what we are doing should represent in the rules, where actually what I'm looking for is not the simulation of reality. I'm looking for the feeling of what it would feel like in that reality. So the feeling of being trampled, or the feeling of having a horde of those goblinoids charging after a PC and being surrounded and being overrun, is what I'm looking for. I want them to feel like if I fall down, they are going to trample the hell out of me. Or if I get surrounded by the pikemen, there's nowhere for me to go. So I want them to feel like they're done that way, rather than, oh, 60 pikemen are coming around you. Here, let's roll some dice. 1, no. 2, no. 3, or whatever. Or, you hit your online die roller. Click, 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 click. No. You want to, for me, I want to describe the feeling of like claustrophobia, or the feeling of an enemy bearing down on them that seems to be numbering in the thousands. It feels like I want them to feel exhausted. I want them to feel like they don't have enough resources in time and energy to handle everything in front of them, and to be not that this is a puzzle that they need to solve, but in many ways it is a puzzle, right? Like, okay, so I'm engaged with an enemy, but if I disengage with that enemy, or I need to disengage with that enemy because I don't want the opportunity attacks, but a burning trebuchet is rolling downhill and I've got to move the hell out the way. Oh, one of my allies just got trampled and knocked down by some horse riders, so I want to help them out. And so throwing all this at the players and forcing them, okay, all right, what are you going to do? Wow, man, I want to I want to go over and stabilize my ally so we can get a chance for the cleric to go over to heal him, or the paladin, but the paladin's locked in a pitched battle with those 3 ogres. But at the same time, there's this other thing coming after me. So for me, the environment is my way of like, this is getting a little boring. What's cool to throw in here? Oh, that burning wagon. What else is cool here to throw in there? Oh, a barrel gets knocked over and the chemicals are lit on fire and there's smoke and flames everywhere. Or, the wizard, someone the castle towers cast another spell and acid rain starts pouring from the sky, or a plague or something starts, sweeping through the region, or whatever the case may be, right? So, Here we go. Yeah, Star Fox. Undead power armored demons. I hear you. Yeah, stacking them all together. But yeah. Also, the last thing I'll say is that you guys know I love my triangles. You can create, and this happens more often in real time war and in battles than we think, that it's not about killing the enemy, right? It's about achieving a goal. And while the two might seem like they are identical, maybe they are not. So an example would be getting the high ground, right? Or rescuing POWs, or resupplying people who are trapped because they don't have food or water or ammo, or being a decoy, leading enemies away from where they need to be, or using deception to convince the enemy to chase you so that you can do a pincer maneuver of yourself, or convince them to have them follow down into a tight valley where your allies are set up at the high ridge to trap them into a place, or destroy a dam to flood a region and flood the enemy that are down in that same valley or whatnot. So battles allow us to allow the PCs, even if they aren't very powerful, to have an agenda that may not be necessarily destroy the dragon that's strafing the enemy. It could be sending up a flare to call for the allies, or getting to the horn, or raising the banners to have a retreat, or finding your gathering your dead allies from the battlefield while enemies are stalking around in the dark or the fog trying to attack each other. It's those things where, yes, my player character can hack away, one shot, one kill an enemy all day long. But do I want to do that 1,500 times? Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to do this before the sun rises, right? We need to get over the castle walls so that we can drop the drawbridge down and open up the portcullis so our allies can flood the castle before the coming dawn. And we've got an hour to do it, and we need to do this on our own. It's not about sieging the castle, killing all the enemies inside, going up to the main, throne room and killing the king. Maybe the point is to get the dictator and bring the dictator before everyone and bring them to trial, or a public event, because killing them turns this person into a martyr, right? You can have lots of those divergent types of successes that don't necessarily mean killing everything. Yeah, you guys up in the chat, like, it sounds like the Boon Striders from Exalted. I've got my Exalted books. And Star Fox Fantasy says, mechas kill dragons. Yeah, you can have those kind of battles as well. That's far fantasy. But same thing. The same rules apply, right? Where, yes, you can have mechs fight dragons, but where are they doing it at, right? Are they doing it on the decks of aircraft carriers? Are they doing it at the base of the base around active volcanoes? Are they doing it on fault lines, or a vast desert with a sandstorm blowing towards them? Is there a blizzard happening? You can start adding in these other little events. Are allies helping you attack? Is it Godzilla and the allied armies attacking King Ghidorah, whatever the three-headed monster is, right? Is it that? Who knows? It's up to you. But adding those things in, those elements in, I think is really cool. So anyway, guys, that'll do it for us for today. I want to thank you guys very much for helping me make this show what it is. You guys bring the heat. That I didn't know it looked like that. I wasn't even paying attention. That is a behind my head. That's a my window with a Wonder Woman screen up there. You can't really see the rest of the room because it's overcast and I don't have my light on. So sorry about that. It is kind of odd. But anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me. Sorry about the oddness, but everyone have a great day. We will be talking about, with World Building Wednesday, we will be talking about building a world that is in constant battle. Of course, 40K is going to have to come up. But anyway, guys, everybody have a great one. I'll see you later. Thank you for joining me. Bye.